Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, Coop joins me once again. You know him by now. Coop is a very thoughtful guest to have on, and I really appreciate his insight. And he got in touch with me and said, hey man, given this, what is it called, Meta program that Zuckerberg announced, we have some stuff to talk about. And I said, okay, so get ready. This is a good one. Personalities, genocide, and evolution. It's my three favorite topics. So, there you go. I hope you enjoy it. RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And grab his book, Project Manicore. Do me a solid, guys. Go to RyanBunting.com. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. And don't forget, it's that time of year. The Libertarian Institute is holding their fall fund drive. So, give us your money and keep our lights on. Keep podcasts being made, articles being written, and, you know, all that good jazz that you enjoy over at the libertarianinstitute.org. So, fall fund drive is libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And we appreciate all of your support. Enjoy the show. Hello, Coop. Welcome back.
How you doing?
I'm good, man.
Good.
I'm ready to dive into the subject. I'm excited because I know I'm going to learn a bunch here, which I do every time we talk, but still.
This one is a fucking minefield. So,
well, we're going to do our best to stay away from those mines. Knowing me, I'm going to put my foot in it at least once.
it's going to take quite a bit of context, but we're going to start with genetic inheritance as it relates to culture, status, and we're going to end up with why you shouldn't give your information to Google.
Yeah.
So it's going to have quite the length and breadth, so to speak.
Yeah. And this ties into something that I've brought up on shows before about evolutionary biology and what I've heard Brett Weinstein, I think, say about it, about how technology, and this actually like kind of ties into Future Shock too, with the book that you turned me on to, how technology begins advancing at such a fast rate that evolutionarily the human evolutionarily are not capable of keeping up with the rate at which technology is moving forward.
That's definitely true, but we're not going to touch on that. Not in this one.
Okay.
That's too much of. That's more of a discussion on the rate of change, which has a different implication than what we're going to go at in this one.
Plus, I got to read 2 books before we get to that. So
we're going to discuss the gears of change.
Okay.
So if we put ourselves back to pre-Neolithic times, human beings were directed by their various environments as to what they had to develop in order to survive as groups, as peoples, as individuals. And those characteristics, physiological characteristics, were inherited based upon how well, just like any other animal, how well those characteristics increase the likelihood of survival. But what isn't talked about so much is how the heritability of personality played a huge part in this. Personality is between 40 and 60% inherited from parents, and so it wasn't just a parent that had a certain physiology that had an adaptation that added to survival, but also the personality characteristics of those individuals, which also lent to their survival. And along with that, I suppose you'd have to say how well their personality meshed with the environment, whether it resulted in innovativeness, whether or not it resulted in industriousness, whether or not it resulted in creativity, et cetera, et cetera. And it had more to do with kind of how it got wrapped into the culture. So I'll bring it out an example of how environment affected the development of different cultures, in that some cultures had less of or I should say more of a need that time and effort were expended directly into accessing survivability or traits of survivability, because they lived in a harsh environment.
Right.
And therefore, status within the tribe was given to those individuals who had the personality to endure, the tenacity to persist, and the physiological toughness to survive and propagate. And so those individuals passed down their genes and their personality, and with that carried on that inheritance of capability for surviving in that harsh environment. Whereas in another culture or other cultures, you might get a much easier environment with which to survive. Their food might be more easily or readily available, and therefore developing a purely survival-based personality might take a back seat to developing an entertaining personality or a creative personality or an artistic personality. As well, physiologically, it may be that having an excess of a certain physiological trait would actually be harmful for their survival, depending upon their environment. For example, if you lived in sub-Saharan Africa, having extra fat would not necessarily be helpful for you. Whereas living in Northern Europe, having that extra layer of fat would be very helpful. So in that sense, you had those status markers being first influenced by the environmental conditions, which kind of forced the hand of various tribes into developing the dominance of what was important for them to carry on and pass on to their progeny. Where do I go from here? As civilization developed, and we start getting the changes from environmental pressure, which opened up the door for the development and success of a broader span of inherited personality types. In fact, in order for civilization to expand, you required a larger group of personality types, they were still very distinctly regional because they had their basis in that same environmental influence on their heritability. So, for example, in European culture, you still had a culture whose status markers had at its base characteristics that promoted aggression, innovation, and to a certain extent, competition. There was a high level of competence required because mistakes in the earlier form of culture could very easily result in a speedy death. And therefore, those became the basis for the civilizational development of those cultures. Whereas in other cultures that had more of a tropic environment and therefore different personality types developed that had characteristics that were supplementary to core environmental demands. There became more values within the civilizations that they developed that had emphasis on artistic endeavors, music, storytelling, decoration. And you can actually look at the development of Greek culture in that same sense too, as it kind of strode the border between the north and the south. It had readily livable climate. It had the ability to develop a leisure class. It had innovation, right, as well as it had a high propensity to reward aesthetic output. So when you have a large preponderance of personalities inheriting from their progeny the personality types and characteristics that were rooted in that initial environmental impetus, then you started to develop what became regional, but then became later known as national characteristics. So nations started developing characteristics. So it was bantered around, and it's very much outdated now, but it was still kind of existing, at least when I was a kid, where this is the root for stereotypes, by the way, where, you know, this national people are this way. And you could say, oh, Canadians are always polite, you know, we're too polite.
Yeah.
The Brits are too stuffy, you know, Americans are loudmouths, you know.
My favorite Canadian stereotype is that y'all are afraid of the dark.
Yeah. I've never heard that one, but all I can say is
I heard it on some TV show, man. It was,
right?
I don't know.
Well, one day Canada rule the world, and you'll all be sorry.
And we'll all be saying sorry that way.
Yes. So as you started to get national characteristics and subsequent stereotypes, they had their roots in that personality inheritance down through generations and generations that were developed as status signatures from the survivability of the environment that they were in.
Yeah.
And a lot of people took pride in their national characteristics because they were very specifically a signature of what their parents and grandparents and forefathers and mothers had to endure, and the characteristics that were unique that allowed them to survive in specific regions.
Right.
They weren't just negative stereotypes, right?
Right. It's like the archetype of the World War II veteran kind of deal, the greatest generation, you know.
Well, yeah, yeah. But more specific, right? Like,
Right. Yeah. But
and you could break it down. Like even in the United States, there are different regions that have their stereotypes. In Canada, there are provinces that have their stereotypes, right? But
right.
you won't find anybody that is really going to decry those stereotypes, because it's kind of like a jab, but an admission that yes, that is the character of the people in this region, and
Right.
we're fine with that, and we're proud of that.
Yeah.
And it adds to identity.
Yeah.
So as you had civilization, you started, as I mentioned, getting changes in status signatures. So the purity of those personality inheritances started expanding outwards. So to give an example, it's why people in the city, in urban areas, right, seem to have a far greater breadth of personality types and outlooks than those living in rural communities. And it's not just directly related to population, because you could take sample population out of a city that was the same size as any rural town, and you'd still have that disparity between similarities in personality types. So it's not just a matter of population.
Is it a matter of options, of choice, perhaps?
It's a matter of need as well.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because everything develops at its root in a utilitarian fashion, in an accidental way, right? So it's not intended by us as a species. It is adjunct to adaptations that our environment demands. So in a city, in order for a city to operate, the demand is that it requires a broad base of personalities due to the complexity of the nature of a city.
Okay.
Right? Whereas that complexity is not required in a rural town. And so you get people that are outside of that rural town personality bracket often fleeing to cities because they can't find their niche in the smaller town. Right?
Yeah.
So this leads to personality types, of which there are. It's been there. I think it's far more complex, but for simple reasons, it's been narrowed down to a measured dominance I should say a dominant scale between 5 factors, which are called personality traits or characteristics. The big 5, they're called.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, those are the dominance of those traits and how they mix together are what creates your overall personality profile, right? Which is indicative of your likely behavior given a certain circumstance or a set circumstance. And those are, as I said, 60 to 40% inherited from either one of your parents. So you are a combination 60-40 of either one of your parents along any one of these given 5 traits.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that anybody can readily see that. It's not a big mystery or something that's going to come as a big shock to anybody that they have characteristics of their mother and their father.
Yeah.
So you can wind that back to my initial assertion that given regional limitations not so far back in our past, that you would have great domination of specific character traits right? Even so much as 200 years ago, where many people did not leave a 100-kilometer radius from where they were born, right?
Yeah.
So that is how strong that inheritance would be. And it's not until you get to more recent times that you have a majority of individuals expanding out their personality options as far as representative of success within a society or civilization.
Right. And the society is becoming much more nomadic, at least at scale, compared to what it was 30 years ago. And
yes,
what is that going to do to the distribution of personalities?
well, there's what we have to recognize is that this spread of personality types is just as new to our species as anything else attached to technological advances in this world, in this age, right? It's something that we're just as unprepared to deal with as we are with computers, right? Or space travel, right?
Yeah.
And we're kind of seeing that, and this, in my opinion, this is the expression of the real base of what is going wrong with social media, right?
Right.
Is that we're not equipped to deal so much with alien personalities, right?
Yeah.
We haven't adapted enough in order to be able to embrace alien personalities and see them as being beneficial to our survival.
Well, and social media tends to bring out the worst of a personality you already find alien, right? It's not even like you're meeting that person's best self whenever you meet them on social media. In most cases, a lot of times you're meeting the worst part of that person.
Well, what you're actually meeting is the survivalist aspect of their personality confronting what they perceive as being something that is maladaptive to society, that is in the personality of the individual that they're speaking with,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So if you had a small, tight-knit group, right, then that maladaptation of personality that you're perceiving would have a direct effect on your survivability as a group, right? But in this age of communication and personality type spread, and the demands for personality spread that our complex society has now, there is no way that they have any direct bearing on your survivability, which is not something that we are taking into account. So, like, does it really matter what so-and-so thinks?
Right.
Right? It would matter if they were within your tight family group, but it doesn't matter because they live 4,000 kilometers away, are in a different country, right?
Yeah.
And you'll never, ever meet them or speak to them. But you're treating it as though they are a direct threat to the survivability of their group, right?
Yeah.
So it's this personality spread that we're kind of reacting to in the social media sense, without the ability to discern the difference between a direct effect on our group in a survival sense, and whether or not they actually make any difference to that. So, it's just the same thing. Every once in a while, you just got to shut down and go, you know what that person thinks or how that person is doesn't make any fucking difference to me.
Right.
Like in the real world, right? And that is a hack in the human brain that politics has always been able to take advantage of, right?
Yeah.
And it certainly is doing so now, even though it's not the first time in human history that it's ever happened.
Yeah.
So when we get down to the heritability of personality, you can take it back far, far into history, where if we're considering the political aspects of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where if you had groups of people in power, the largest threat to them were defined by specific ethnic groups or religious groups, or if you go back farther, families versus other families, right?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore would carry out, wars of eradication or genocides, et cetera, all those terrible things that humans do to each other.
Yeah.
In an attempt to eradicate a specific group, right? And it was always the name of that group or the name of that family or the name of that politic or the name of that religion that the war was against, right?
Yeah.
But what it actually was it was personality traits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inherited personality traits as reflected by that group, right? Or national character, so to speak, or religious character that were inherited for generations and therefore were inherent in those groups of people that were the enemy, that were perceived as the threat to power by individuals that wielded power, right?
Yeah.
So Stalin, for example, he saw the personality of the kulaks as being entrepreneurial, independent, capable of understanding and networking in order to achieve a level of independence and success. And he saw that as personality traits that they had carried on for several generations. And he saw any furtherance of those personality traits as a direct threat to his socialism, his communism.
Right. Yeah.
So it wasn't for their wealth that they had to be wiped out. It was because those personality traits had to be taken out of the population for future generations to be bereft of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have the same thing happening in Hitler's Germany, right?
Yeah.
And it was just using all of the other excuses that people use, right? In order to eradicate personality traits like grand individualism, the concept of the strength of individual and belief in themselves as individuals that work within a group for something that is extra national, which would be their identity as God's people, right?
Yeah.
And the strength of that had to be wiped out of the population. And they provided a perfect scapegoat for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the same with the traveling people or the gypsies that he waged war on. They had independent spirit. They were extra national. They were not associated with any sense of national pride or identity other than within their own specific group, and that also had to be wiped out.
Right.
Right. And these were all characteristics and personality characteristics that were inherited for generations that were key points in the survival of these groups of people. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to be wiped out. And you have another example with Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, where the personality types that would not accept a simple rural agricultural life throwing back to 200 years previous in a very simple agrarian society he had personality types that he knew he had to wipe out, and the best way to isolate those personality types was through their level of education or intellectualism.
Yeah.
To the point where if you wore glasses, you were targeted by the Khmer Rouge to be wiped out because they were associated with you being smart.
Yeah. And so, in the thing that strikes me in all of this is it doesn't matter what they label you as. That
No,
it's not, because that label is not what they're fighting against.
that's correct.
They may have useful idiots, as Lenin would have called them, that are fighting against that label, and that's why they use these labels. But ultimately, that's not what it is. So when you hear about, like, let's say January 6th, for instance, and they're saying, oh, a bunch of white supremacists, raided the Capitol, they're using the term white supremacist as a signifier to the useful idiots, that these are the people you're supposed to hate. But it has it has no bearing on the reason why they're going after that group of people, Yeah,
well, the thing is, they can't call them patriots.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just like the anti-vaxxer thing. You could have had every vaccine ever and not want this one vaccine, and you're an anti-vaxxer.
Yes, you have to. That's just it. It's the false label, but what you're going after is the characteristics of the individuals within those groups.
Right. People that are thinking for themselves.
We have to eradicate this characteristic or disempower this characteristic.
Right. Yeah.
And
I think that's why there's such a kind of a panic right now. And I hear a lot of people talking about the possibility of genocide in the United States, the possibility of, gulags and boxcars. And, that's always been a threat. But there's a lot of people that are saying it's around the corner right now because of the way that the propaganda is being handled at this point in time.
Well, I think that's like probably the worst thing that you could probably allow to happen, in the sense that, well, you can have the individuals that are convinced that it has to happen, right?
Yep.
And then you have the individuals that are convinced that it's going to happen to them. And both are equally likely to result in that outcome. So it's just foolish one way or the other.
Right.
Like, oh, you're going to put me in a boxcar? Well, I'm going to put you in a boxcar first.
Then you end up with a Pinochet type situation.
You end up serving the same end for who? Right?
Yeah, well, so you may be serving the same masters. You know what?
It's better to go to a gulag as your own individual person rather than be a puppet as a reaction to some imaginary thing that you think may or may not happen. There's no such thing as a defensive murder.
Yeah.
Right?
No matter what the neocons tell you, there is no such thing as defensive murder. Yes, I agree.
That's correct.
Bombing for peace is like fucking for virginity. Let's just get this through our heads.
Yeah. So it's better to be a principled individual, and anybody who's read The Gulag Archipelago will realize that. Anybody who has ever listened to George Orwell's Last Message will also know that.
I have the Gulag Archipelago on fucking audiobook, and I just haven't brought myself to digging into it because it's such a big project. And it's just one of those things that's like, I want to listen to it because it's supposed to be one of the greatest books ever in the history of the world. But
it's impactful.
I haven't brought myself, I haven't gotten myself to the position where I'm ready to tackle a 2,000 page book.
Well, you know what? You can do a light version that kind of touches on the same thing by Arthur Kessler called Darkness at Noon.
Oh, okay.
It made it into the top 100 books of the 20th century or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. I might start with that one just as a primer.
Yeah. So, getting back to personality.
Mm-hmm.
How long have we been going here, Tommy? I don't know. I kind of lose track of time here.
We're right about 25 minutes.
Okay. So I've really
we
actually
started a little late, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I blew right through the first part of that. I was thinking that it was going to take a lot longer to explain. I have to ask you whether or not I've explained it enough.
I think so. I don't really have a lot of questions about what you said. I think what you said was pretty well explained.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a lot of questions. You know me. I'm rude. I'll interrupt you and ask if I have a question.
So, well, let's. I want to expand on how that happened. Like this. Let's with the topic of genetics and all that shit. There comes along this notion of superiority, which is like it's the least intellectual outlook you can have, considering that superiority of individuals or racial groups or regional groups or ethnicities were such a multi-pronged aspect, in that within racial groups you had different regions, right? Where the superiority had more to do with the skills that you learned, right? It had nothing to do with the fact that you were part of the same phenotype, right? I don't think that anybody's ever claimed that a native from the Amazonian basin is just as well equipped physiologically to survive or is superior to an Inuit in the Arctic Circle. Right.
Yeah. And a Californian is not fit to survive in Texas, so y'all just stay in California. You're not going to make it.
So the notion of superiority was once again one of those useful idiot terminologies, right?
Yeah.
Used to mobilize groups to attack certain personality characteristic groups that were deemed as a threat.
Yeah.
So again, it's also down to the very subjective nature of what is superior, and superiority has more to do with environment and skills, and the skills that your particular culture would give you to live in that environment, and the environmental effects on physiological adaptations that really weren't your choice, but were the result of, a few hundred generations of exposure to that environment.
So, do you see? All right. So, I'm making a joke about Californians moving to Texas because there's a lot of ruckus here in Texas, and almost more so about Californians moving here than there are about illegal immigrants anymore. It's gotten kind of weird, and so that's why I make a joke about that. But do you think that the amount of time since the progressive era, since Woodrow Wilson, and the introduction of these large, I guess I'll say communist, but that's not even like really a great descriptor of what is happening. But these Marxist kind of ideas and the way they've been adopted on the coasts, like in New York City or in California, and the rejection of them in the middle of the country. Was there enough time for it to be an evolutionary process, or is there something else happening there?
Well, I think that the nature of the coastal cities, right? The nature of their economy attracted specific personality types and concentrations, right? So as a result of that, you had the children that were the result of those personality types inheriting that personality type, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't take very long for an economic environment to mold the people that are within its purview, right?
Okay.
So if you have if you have the middle of the country flyover are ranchers and farmers or work in extracting natural resources, they're going to have quite a different generational characteristic as being dominant than California economic basis of entertainment and artistic endeavor, right?
Okay.
So they're definitely going to be environments that reward very specific brackets of personality types with status, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you get the regional characteristics. So what you're asking about is whether or not the California personality type has been inherited in relatively short amount of time. And I would say that's absolutely true, simply because of the increased mobility and the mass attraction of personality types to specific regions that reward those personality types with success. So it would happen in a very short period of time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
Compared to 100 or 200 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is if there were incentives to thinking this way for these people, and if these people, because I remember there was a story that came out a while back. Some guy wrote an op-ed, and he was from California, and he said he moved to Austin, and he stayed there for, I don't know, a couple of years, and he moved back to California and just wrote this op-ed just ripping Texas and Austin. And Austin's like the most liberal city in Texas. It's the closest thing to California you would ever find in Texas. And so it was really funny because he wrote this long op-ed just ripping Texas as a bunch of inbreeders and, gun nuts and this, that, and the other. It's like, dude, you were in Austin. Like, I don't know. You have this diluted view of how humans live. If you moved to Austin and you thought they were gun nuts and crazy, so I wonder. I look at like this kind of like migration from these cities that have had their economies destroyed, and these wealthy people moving from like San Francisco or Los Angeles to Austin or to Dallas or to Houston. And I'm just like, their whole thing is turn Texas blue. And it's like, there's a part of me that's, how do you not abandon the mindset that created the infrastructure you're running from?
Well, this is ultimately the problem, the underlying problem with mass immigration, right?
Okay.
From one nation to another, right? It's actually shifting the personality characteristics of the demographic in an area, right?
Uh-huh.
To have a predominance of a personality characteristic that at its base gained a dominance for different reasons in a different area of the world, right? And that you have that clash of personality types, right? With one seeing their personality type as being the one that is developed indigenously, rooted back to the environmental impetus of that region on development of their characteristic, confronting perceived invasion of a different personality type that had development of domination rooted in a different environmental impetus, right? So it goes back to the same concept of the issue that we have with social media in perceiving a maladaptive personality type in an individual and reacting as though our survival is dependent upon them abandoning it, right?
Yeah.
Except for it turns it into a real case where these individuals are coming into a community and potentially changing the survivability of the individuals that pre-existed in that region, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's at its very core and root is very much a survival reaction that is innate in all humans, right? It can't be helped, and we can see it on a level where we are reacting to it, like in social media, when it's not even relevant, and yet for some reason we cannot grasp that when it is relevant, yes, we're also going to get a similar reaction, you know?
Right.
So in Texas, they're concerned that, like you said, Californians coming in are going to turn the state blue, right? Which is basically saying a preponderance of that personality type is going to change the characteristics of Texas.
Right.
The personality of Texas is going to change, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really think Texas would be better off putting a wall on its western border than it would on its southern border.
The question that isn't being asked, right, is in a truly democratic society, right,
okay,
where individuals are empowered to change and grow and have a voice in their community, why aren't they allowed to question whether or not they want changes to the personality of their region, right?
Yeah.
But I have never been given an adequate answer to that question, right?
Yeah.
Instead, there's just an accusation that comes out, right? The accusation of xenophobia or racism or any of these other phobias. But there has never been a good answer to that question, because it can apply to other groups as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like why wouldn't, if you want to look at the United States and the southern border crisis, why wouldn't the Mexicans be interested in maintaining the flavor of the personality of Mexico by resisting insurgent waves of individuals from another country? I think they'd perfectly be within their right to resist that.
Or why couldn't Californians refuse Texans that want to move to California? You know, like it can go in so many different directions.
It can. However, there is the concept of the nation, right? So the reason would be is that the United States is a nation, right? So the reason for resisting that is kind of watered down in that you do mutually share a flag. You do mutually share the defense of the borders of the United States. You will get Californian origin military people defending Texan interest. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
So
I get that.
That gets watered down there.
What I'm saying is like California. I think I don't know if they passed the bill or if they. I know it was presented, but I don't know if the bill actually passed. But they had actually presented a bill. What is it? 2 years ago, I guess, to stop people from Alabama traveling to California because of the abortion restrictions that Alabama had passed. And then here recently, you hear all of this talk about states stopping citizens of other states crossing the border dependent on vaccine status. You know, so all these things have been floated out there, you know, in the last couple of years, but it's always okay if it's floated out there by the left. And if the right floats it out there, then it's like, oh my God, you're xenophobic, you know, or whatever. And so
that's because there's never a demand for an actual answer. Instead, there's a there's just the speedy withdrawal from the accusation.
Right.
You know, so that has to do with not having enough backbone to be persistent.
I stumbled onto a question though I want to ask, and I think, I don't know if there's anybody worth asking. It'd be you. How much do you think that the two parents working and the government school systems basically raising children has changed the dynamic? Maybe not of, well, I don't know. Has it changed the dynamic of personality? Because it certainly seems that it's changed the dynamic of ideology in philosophy. But do you think it's changed the dynamic of personality as well?
Well, I think that when people are choosing a mate, if they don't plan on being with that mate, right, then their requirements are different with regards to the personality of the individual involved, right? So in a traditional family, personality requirements in order to maintain a traditional family are quite different than if you're pursuing a different strategy, right?
Yeah.
That goes right along with previous conversations that we've had regarding males and the differences between our strategy and K strategy. You know, our strategy, people have definite characteristic market personality characteristics, and those are desired, dependent upon environmental demands or selection pressures, right?
Right.
So really, the effect is since 1965. If you want to look at the effect on the beginning push for single parent households, just read anything by Thomas Sowell on that, and that expands out to two working parents also having lesser of an influence on their child as they're being raised. It has the same general effect. Less parental influence has a specific outcome that is shared by both situations, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm asking that because here this week, and I should have shared this story with you, and I don't know why I didn't. I'll send it to you after we get off here. But I read a story from the Washington Post where the author, it was an op-ed, but I mean, still, it was published in the Washington Post. So, you know, I mean, there's some clout there with a certain type of person. And the title of the piece was something along the lines, parents think they should have a say, or parents think they have a say in their children's curriculum. They don't. Yeah. And I was like, wow. They're saying the quiet parts out loud. And there's a politician, I think in Arlington, near Dallas.
I think there was the guy in the gubernatorial race for Virginia. The Democratic candidate said that parents shouldn't have any influence on the curriculum of their children.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then I think it's Terry McAuliffe is running for mayor of Arlington or something like that, and he's straight up saying that parents have no choice.
That's who I was talking about. Sorry, it's just American politics. It's all a big.
I feel you.
A big clusterfuck to me, you know.
Yeah.
I just hear some shit and I just shake my head now, like. Nothing really surprising. You get the general tone. That's about all that matters, because details are pointless.
Right. And so this really seems coordinated. And so the question is, do they is there? Obviously, they think that they can control ideology through the school systems, which they've proven over the years. Yep. Does this impact personalities? Like, how does
no, we have to kind of get back on the other track, because I'm going to take it into where personality goes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We had personality, like I said, was inherited, right? And certainly through the school system, they can reward specific personalities with status and success, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen that for a long time.
Right.
But what education now is, basically the battle is how much of is education, how much of it is indoctrination. So that's that aspect.
Right.
But to get back to personalities, like we were talking about, we just mentioned how these tyrants were utilizing basically false appellations or false group identities as excuses to eradicate specific personality traits out of a population or out of a nation.
Yes.
Because they represent threats to the vision of that tyrant as to what the nation should be, right?
Uh-huh.
And those personality traits were blanketed to entire groups of people, because the information wasn't tight enough on as exactly who to target, right?
Right.
So you only had the broad generalizations of what was called national characteristics, or those stereotypes that we have talked about, that were developed as signatures of people of different ethnic, cultural, or regional groups. Now, thanks to Google, thanks to social media, thanks to our increased purchasing through online outlets, right?
Mm-hmm.
The information that Google gathers, right, is now the primary indicator of your very specific personality and personality type, to the point where they can predict what you're going to purchase, when you're going to purchase it, when you're going to take your next shit, what you're going to have for lunch, right? What you're likely to do 2 weeks from now on Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? And that's why information is valued now above anything else. And very specifically, that information is exactly what governments want, so that they don't have to broadly pinpoint any type of ethnic or regional or cultural group. Now they can pinpoint exact personality types, exact personality characteristics, and they can either create situations where that person with those personality traits does not have an opportunity to procreate, is not given any status or success, or is outright targeted as an individual that is not allowed to continue in the society or bring their personality into the future of that society.
Right.
And that's what we have to be afraid of.
Yeah.
See, we all talk about this fear and of, letting your information out, but nobody has actually said, look, this is exactly what we have to be afraid of. Right?
Yeah.
There's this generalized concept of, information and knowledge is power, but nobody has said, well, this is exactly why.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why. Your personality determines your future based upon what government at what time has information pertaining to it, in contrast to what it plans.
Right.
Right. And as you get an increase in the controls and the tracking and all of the technology that allows that information to be processed quickly, like at the speed of light for all intents and purposes, then the ability that a government has to enact such controls can happen so subtly that it isn't recognized, right? And we're already kind of seeing that in the generalized sense of disempowering males, right? By having males disempower themselves.
Yeah.
To get rid of that success for the first protective characteristics of any human population.
Yeah.
Right.
And society is hella strong when it comes to the way that we interact with each other and interact with the world. And people will intentionally bottle up parts of their personality in order to have that societal link. And if they've convinced the population that societal status is based upon your interactions online, on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever, as opposed to the actual accomplishments that you're making in life and the things that you're actually doing and your self-sufficiency and your ability to take care of your family, then people are going to bottle up some of the stronger aspects of their personality, bend the knee to the societal norms so that they can keep their status online on these social media platforms.
Well, if you go back to taking a look at R strategy and K strategy, right? K strategy being the harsh selective pressure demanding very specific investment in children in order to forward their success, versus the R strategy, which is have as many different children with as many different genetic characteristics as possible, not invest anything in any of them, just have sheer numbers, right? Uh-huh. The demands of the K strategy male, right, have been equated with misogyny and sexism.
Mm-hmm.
So K strategy males are therefore finding it more difficult to find the opportunity to procreate, right?
Yeah.
Whereas R strategy males are having increased opportunity to procreate, which means that those personality traits in R strategy males are going to gain dominance in the population versus the dominance of the K strategy personality males,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So that was like step one. But then you can isolate it down even further, right? Where you can create situations that will mobilize different personality types of people to put them as the focus of a targeted action. You can create social environmental cues that will trigger personality types to mobilize against that group.
Right.
You can start playing populations of people based upon the overall information that you've gathered, right?
Yep.
And play society like a harp. But mostly it's about truly manipulating the personality characteristics of society as a whole by utilizing what you know of inheritability of personality characteristics, so that you can eventually create a docile, self-involved, R strategy, apathetic people who have that just as inherent aspects of their personality, and therefore cannot find any way out of it, right, as a group,
right,
because they all have the same shared characteristics.
Right.
Which is the equivalent of creating a monoculture.
Yeah.
Right. And a monoculture, as soon as it encounters a disease that it has no defenses against, gets wiped out. Doesn't matter whether it's wheat. Doesn't matter whether or not it's a koala that can only eat eucalyptus. The eucalyptus is gone, so is the koala. And if you have a monoculture of human personality, right, without true diversity,
mm-hmm.
then that and the largest threat to what we call humanity is the disease of an ideology coming and taking control over that future.
Yeah. Well, and so much of this makes sense in my mind, and I'm certain my listeners know this by now listening to this podcast. But, from the 40s up until modern day, the CIA has been working on studying personalities and the way that people act and the way that people react, whether it was MK Ultra or whatever, other operation they were working on, Mockingbird, all these foreign interventions overseas run by the CIA to spread American hegemony. They were gathering data on personalities and the way that people react.
Immensely.
And I never put it together, but this is the reason, or it has to be at least one of the reasons, for the InQtel program, which is a CIA funding program that dumped billions of dollars into social media and online technologies over the last 10 years.
Oh gosh, it started even before then. It's just a matter of trends.
Well, I was trying not to be a conspiracy theorist, so I said 10 years.
No. The recognition of this by governments and controlling civilizational interests goes back as far as we have recorded history, right?
Yeah.
Where there were certain characteristics and traits which were given status above all others in different histories of different nations throughout the world at different times, right? And that's the same thing as creating a national character by giving dominance to personality characteristics by rewarding them with status, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why, like 1 in every 200 people is related to Genghis Khan. He rewarded himself quite heavily.
Right.
Ramesses II as well in Egypt did the same thing.
Genghis Khan almost had as many women as Wilt Chamberlain, or vice versa. One of the two.
But that goes without saying. To think that it hasn't expanded or hasn't gained an impetus or hasn't been studied and analyzed and developed is just absolutely ridiculous to even fathom. And it goes, like I say, it goes down to trends, right?
Right.
Why does a rock star have status over a doctor?
Yeah.
Right? Because a rock star shows status through being intentionally irresponsible and delinquent. Rock and roll, man. They have so much status they can do whatever they want, and it's cool.
Yeah.
Now, if you ever wanted to see the epitome of our strategy, it would be a rock star.
Yeah.
Right? A doctor is the epitome of K strategy because they have to invest so much in themselves that, of course, they're going to invest that same thing into every other aspect of their lives. But a rock star has far more status than a doctor. So you can kind of look at all the things that we give status to in our society and directly associate them with our strategy as opposed to K strategy, right?
Yes.
And there's a reason that that's been promoted for a long time. And it's to change the personality characteristics of our society. And if it's not a rock star, it's a hip hop star.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Yeah.
Times have changed. Rock and roll ain't what it used to be.
Well, it's entertainment, period. I mean, like, entertainers are put on a pedestal and idolized by much more children than professionals and that are experts. I mean, you could walk down the street.
But even adults, Tommy, like, nobody comes home and goes, "Oh my God, I got an autograph from my family doctor."
Right. Yeah. My thing was I was going to say, like, if you walk down the street and ask people whether they have more respect for LeBron James or Ben Carson, like, LeBron James would win hands down. Nobody would even think twice about it.
Yeah.
You know,
but
that does say a lot about society, you know, that, you know, Ben Carson, despite his political woes and some of the stupid shit he said in politics, I mean, he's one of the best neurosurgeons ever in the world. You know, like, the dude's just a phenomenal neurosurgeon.
Yeah, he should have just stayed in his own playground.
Yes,
to a certain extent. And you know what? So should LeBron.
Yeah.
LeBron hasn't really got the best political opinion, especially when it comes to his friends in communist China.
Yeah. No,
right?
I agree. I'm just thinking, like, who, if you go through any city or any town and ask people who they would rather be, they're going to say LeBron James.
Yeah.
And it won't even be a contest. And it's like, who's done more for society? Obviously Ben Carson. Like, he's, saved lives, you know? So
the question is, right, having an understanding of how that entire personality mechanic operates, right, and how it's at the fundamental basis with which civilizations are changed and developed and control by various governments are gained, right?
Yeah.
I think we have to start looking at personality and the amount of information we give out about our personality out in a far more speculative way. We have to start really looking at what we want the personality of humanity to be in the future.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
not just like
in knowing the history of governments targeting personalities, it would be wise to be very on guard with your own information so that you don't want to paint a target on your own back.
Yes, simply by being yourself.
Right.
Right. The key is to be yourself to a few and close group of people, right?
Mm.
And that runs counter to the message of when the whole world has to accept you the way you are. No, the whole world doesn't have to know the way you are. In fact, it's best if the whole world, and it's better if the whole world doesn't know who you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because it's funny how often the target changes. right?
Let's
Down through
let's move into closing statements. I know you like to keep these about an hour, and we're right at an hour. So,
So the reason I brought this up was because I had made a prognostication with regards to the transhumanist agenda. I can't remember whether or not, I don't think we discussed that yet on the podcast.
I don't think it was on air. I think you had just messaged me. Yeah.
Yeah, and today it came out that Mark Zuckerberg was rebranding Facebook into this company called Meta, which is going to be a generator of a complete virtual reality world where people can identify as their icons and create their own environments with which to socialize and work and live and recreate. And it kind of came a little bit sooner than I thought we were going to announce such an endeavor, but it falls directly in line with that.
Right.
So when you have endeavors like that announced that have enough power and money and interest behind them, then it's going to require a lot of pairing out of specific personality types in order to overcome that social media inconvenience we messaged before, where we perceive personality types as being maladaptive and directly influencing our survival, when in reality they don't. So if you want to take a look in that more depth, I'm going to mention Arthur Kessler's name again, ironically. He wrote a book called The Ghost of the Machine. It's quite a beefy book, but in that he conducts a study of which part of the human brain has to go in order for us to create a peace on earth unified society. And it's quite a scary article work. But he conducted that study with United Nations money. And if you look at his bio, Arthur Kessler, Koestler, you'll see that he spoke with a certain amount of influence and authority on the subject with regards to these future plans for humanity. I don't like talking about conspiracy theory, not when I can just point out, hey, look at this guy's bio, look who he influenced, look who he talked to.
Right.
Like, there's no need to get into conspiracy theory, not when they're telling you exactly what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not when you can see it happening 30 years after they did their work hard.
Yeah, no, I try to be really careful about that and getting into these like speculative conspiracy theories that.
Speculation's fun, but the key is to recognize it as speculation.
Well, I'm talking about the ones that get all popular, you know.
Oh yeah.
They're definitely doing this. It's like I don't know, you know, when you can go read, like I did a couple of episodes on ESG. I'm actually going to be doing another one up here in a few days on ESG as well. And it's like, look, man, I'm reading from the SEC's website. You know, like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, this is what they're doing, you know?
Well, there's speculation and there's documentation.
Right, exactly. And I would rather stick with documentation because, I mean, all I have, you know, is my integrity and my balls, and I'm not giving them up for anybody or whatever Scarface said. That's what, you know, I'm not breaking them for anybody.
Basically, everybody just be really mindful of how you present your personality and where, and be more so mindful of your children, because for most of us, it's already too late. But if you have young kids, you can start protecting them before they have developed a strong enough personality to be marked.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have friends that have kids that are 10, 11 years old that have never been online.
Yeah.
Ever.
You have to protect all of their data. Everything, even the things that you purchased for them, right, are also going to indicate personality. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I don't want to make people paranoid, right? But be mindful. The less information that they have in order to find things out, the more difficult it is for them to identify individuals.
Yeah.
And so it's more often they'll move off to somebody that's easier to identify, which are going to be plenty if you.
And just because you're paranoid does not mean they're not out to get you.
No. If you're paranoid, it just means that you're a student of history.
Yep. So don't be down on yourself for being paranoid. But all right, Coop. So
all right.
I think that's good for this one. We're gonna follow this one up though. You said there's gonna be a part 2 on this one.
It's kind of gonna be a part 2. It's gonna touch on a few of the things.
Okay.
It's gonna have a bit more to do with well, we'll talk about it. I don't want to say anything now.
Yeah. Well, I can always delete. But here, I'm gonna stop the recording and then we'll
all right.
chat.
You wanna be a hero, instead you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you, with the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Of those who are to blame, and we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood.